and welcome to this installment of Frank and Mary here in Southborough. If you have not seen this show before, my name is Art Bergeron. My day job is as an elder law attorney at Myrick O'Connell, but this is not about my day job. It's about my friends Frank and Mary. If you've been to my presentations at the Southborough Senior Center, you know that Frank and Mary have a very simple goal in life. They want to live in their house until they die and be buried in the backyard. And if that's Southborough, that means Southborough. They don't want to move to Marlborough, where I live. They want to stay in Southborough, where Doug lives. They want to know, though, and this is the point of this show, how they can do that. So the point of this show is to help you know the people that you need to know and the programs you need to know about in order to stay home. And a lot of our shows, not surprisingly, have centered around staying at home and not dying with COVID. So, we've talked about a lot of the health implications of that and how to stay safe. But a piece of this also is kind of like how to not die of depression, because it's so bad being at home all the time. So my friend Doug Peck, Doug Peck. Doug's been in Southborough for ages and ages, and his day job is working with seniors, helping seniors. Talk about a title that really talks about helping seniors. So, and so he's found this great guest for us to talk about some of these issues today. Doug, whom do we have, and what are we talking about today?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, we have a very interesting and sort of a new friend of mine as well. Her name is Debbie Schwartz. She's not from Southborough, but because of with Zoom, she has a practice that she can practice just about anywhere. So she can help people in Southborough and all over the place. So we're going to continue, I think, our general theme about health. I mean, we've had people on that talked about Alzheimer's, about prediabetes, diabetes, Parkinson's, etc. But it's almost a taboo subject to talk about mental health. We hear it a lot. We hear that people are a little depressed or they're anxious or whatever. But Debbie is actually a therapist. So I wanted everybody to see what a therapist looked like. And she's going to tell us what a therapist actually does. At least what in her line of work as a therapist, because I think it's really important. We hear all the time that there's a lot of additional stressors on folks from staying home, particularly the elderly, and they do get depressed or anxious. And so I thought it was really important for people to meet a therapist and to begin to understand a little bit about what they can do and what they should be doing around their own mental health.
And I think, Doug, one of the things you mentioned is really key to kind of going forward. That I don't want to say the wonderfulness of COVID. That sounds like an oxymoron, but
right.
The wonderfulness of COVID is that it has introduced people to this way of communicating through Zoom, and as a result has introduced people who had never kind of thought beyond talking to people who were very local, right, to a kind of a broader array of specialists who can really help them. So I think this is wonderful that you're doing this. This is great.
Oh, good. So I'm gonna turn it over to Debbie with sort of the first question. What is a therapist? What do you do? And let's take it. What are you seeing nowadays? Because you do work primarily with the elderly. Is that correct?
I do. I specialize in geriatrics, and I do a lot of work with people who are caregivers also, and people who are in early stage of dementia. So it's kind of that whole arena. So seniors and then the rest of it. And COVID has been particularly difficult. I'm sure you've spoken about this on your show already, has been particularly difficult for this segment of society because some of them might have been lonely and isolated before, but that has increased with this. Even those brief connections they might have had before, they don't have anymore. And then you add to that what's happening in the political climate, which has now created this sense of disbelief and fear and worry, and all that comes together. And that's a lot of emotions for a person to handle. And we are seeing overall, I'm saying we, other therapists, my colleagues are seeing a huge increase of people calling and reaching out and wanting to talk to somebody because they are having trouble. Their emotions are bigger than they usually are. And the skills that they usually use to address loneliness or sadness or anxiety aren't working quite the same during a pandemic. Maybe it was because you'd go out for coffee with a friend and that's what kept you going and that's what
Mhm.
kept your mood happening. But you can't do that anymore. You can't play with your grandchild anymore as something that makes you feel good on a regular basis. So a lot of the things that people used to do to keep their mental health kind of in a stable place aren't accessible anymore. And so that's something that we as therapists can kind of help them with, is figure out what's something new and different we can try, even with all the limitations, to help you feel a little bit better.
Okay. Oh, good.
Can I just point out one of the most interesting things that I just kind of keyed on when you were talking was this notion of skills to deal with these issues, because we don't usually think about it that way. You think about, well, about physical health and, you got to keep exercising and you got to be doing this and you've got certain diet and blah, blah, blah. And then you stay physically healthy. But the notion of really having, which we do have, a skill set, to deal with depression, which we all have, and anxiety, which we all have, but except that we deal with it somehow, except that the routine somehow, as a result of COVID, as a result, and also this not exactly calming political atmosphere, that it's somehow, it's really affected, it could affect, they may require new skills to deal with this kind of new environment. It's really interesting.
Yes,
Mhm.
and a lot of people, I think, have skills and don't even look at them in that perspective. They might not even realize. And so sometimes when I meet a new person, the first thing we do is figure out, what are you already doing that's good for you? And let's remind ourselves that you're already doing that. And then
Yeah.
what can we add to it? Because life has changed drastically. Yes, yeah.
So a person calls you up and that you start talking to them, and it's we're not talking about going back into their childhood and talking about all, bringing all those issues up. Am I correct in that? You're
Like they don't have to buy a couch so that they can sit
right.
on it while you're talking to them, right?
Right. No, I have a couch.
You don't have like a fake Freud little goatee
No,
or anything?
No. I do not require people to lie down on my couch. It's just a comfortable place to sit.
Okay.
And nowadays it doesn't get used anyway because it's all remote.
Mhm.
So if someone wanted to do that work, if they feel that things that happened, let's say in their childhood, are impacting their functioning now, I'm more than happy to help them figure that out, because that does happen. That does happen. You develop some ways of managing your life that weren't so great in your childhood, and you've maintained them over your lifetime, and you're tired of it. So yes, if someone came in and they wanted to do that, I'm more than happy. But more what I see is people saying, I'm overwhelmed with my emotions, or that could be loneliness, grief. In this population, we see a lot of loss and grief. That's a lot of the work that we do. And that's not about necessarily looking back in their history, but it's dealing with the here and now and processing that grief. And there are ways of doing that. So it's about dealing with the here and now and what would improve the quality of life for you
Okay.
right now. That's usually why people come in, because they're not satisfied with their quality of life.
Okay. So
Go ahead.
my question, again, so we think about, other health, we think of unhealthy eating, et cetera, things that we do that we know are unhealthy. We're not as aware of that, right? Sometimes mentally, or, we know that maybe we're doing something that's just, it's not helping me, but I don't understand it. I don't understand why it's not helping me like it used to.
Right. And some people see signs like, they might notice, wow, I'm angry all the time. I'm snapping at this loved one or that friend for no reason. So you might notice certain things that are out of the ordinary for you. And actually, sometimes friends or family members notice it first and then to the person and say, you're not seeming, well, a nice way would be, you're not seeming like your usual self, rather than saying, wow, you are really being terrible. But, it's other people often notice those changes in your mood and behavior before you do. It can go either way. But if a loved one tells you, and it's someone that you trust and respect, tells you, you just don't seem to have that zest for life anymore, or you don't seem to be as easygoing or as satisfied as whatever it might be, it could be a sign that your emotions are a little bit off track, right? They're a little bit larger than they usually are. And maybe you need to talk to someone and figure out how to get back to the way you would like to be. The first
that, by the way, that's also an interesting notion to think of your emotions as being large or small. Because I always think of it as being so in comparison to other things, because so it's almost like you're dealing day to day, and there are a lot of things that you're going through, and a lot of them are cognitive and you're kind of analyzing things, but this notion of having emotions as part of your day to day that are getting larger and therefore displacing other things. Absolutely. Because you're all of a sudden, I can't get up in the morning. It's like I was always a little anxious when I woke up, but now I can't get out of bed, and I have a good friend who I remember went through a lot of this as a young person, and he remember his mantra: always get out of bed, brush your teeth, wash your face, just get going, because and I know certainly that's how my greatest defense in the early morning. Sometimes you just want to like bury yourself and hope you go back to dreamland, which never works. Instead, there's just all these voices that keep kind of growing in your head. And next thing you know, it's an hour later. It's like, well, what happened there?
Sometimes it's helpful for a person to actually measure their emotions, to rate their emotions on a scale of 0 being none to 10 being the absolute most they can tolerate. How alone am I feeling right now? If you're telling me you're feeling an 8 or a 9, that's pretty high. If you're telling me that you're feeling a 5, maybe you're getting by okay, or anything lower than a 5, you seem to be managing with it. So that's another way of looking at the size of emotions. So when people say I'm overwhelmed with emotions, they can also say, what number is my emotion? To get a sense of how big is it? And like you said, how is it displacing all the other thoughts and feelings in my head?
Right. Yeah. Because just like pain, if you've got a pain that's a 10, you're focusing on that pain. There's nothing else that matters.
You're absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah. So your things become out of balance pretty quickly if that happens like that every day in particular.
Absolutely. Yes. We're talking about, things happen and you're going to feel a 10 out of 10 of something at times, but we're talking kind of chronic, right? Weeks, months, and it's not shifting as much as you.
So what I'm also hearing from you is that when you talk about skills and when you talk about, where am I, a 9 or a 10 or an 8, is that you really are in control of this, but you just don't know that at this point. You may not feel it, but you want to put them back in control so you can say, all right, if I'm angry all the time, or it's a 10, there are ways that can bring it down, but I just don't know how myself, because I've never dealt with it before like this.
Exactly. And I'm so in it that sometimes it's hard to think clearly about what I can do about it. And that's why it's good to have another person's perspective on it. But absolutely, there are ways of trying to regain your balance again, right? That's about coping skills. That's about strategies. That's about, all kinds of things like cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy and mindfulness practice and all kinds of techniques that therapists use to help the person feel more in control of their lives. Yes.
So the mindfulness, we had a wonderful person on several months ago who really was talking about mindfulness. One of my most pleasant shows. I found myself totally relaxed because at the end we did a mindfulness exercise, and I was like, well, we got to invite her back. That was terrific. I hear you saying that mindfulness is just one of an array of tools that a person might want to try to learn, right? Because these are learned skills, right? As a way of dealing with this stuff.
Absolutely. There's a ton of research out there that mindfulness can help reduce depression and anxiety. And so I do teach the skills to people. Now, not everyone, skills are not one size fits all. right? What works for one person might not be working for another person. So sometimes there's trial and error. There's also a matter of the more regularly you do it, the better it's going to work, just like you're learning it over time. So some people are not as enamored of mindfulness, and they do better with more cognitive strategies. You kind of you have to get to know the person and see what resonates most with them. But that's part of what my job is also, is to pick and choose among many, many tools about what would be most helpful for this person.
Oh, good. Well,
Could you speak to some of those other strategies? You know, I've heard of the mindfulness, and we've dealt with some of that. You referred to some other things that I hadn't heard of before. Could you, Doug? And I don't mean to be interrupting, because I know you had spoken with Debbie beforehand. So I don't want to be. Maybe we want to move someplace else, but I was curious about that.
Well, no, it's a good question, because people hear cognitive behavior therapy and they say, that sounds pretty complicated. Do I need to know all about it? You're not asking them to know the theory. You're going to pick one tool out of it and help them use it. So what's cognitive behavior therapy? What's an example of that, for example?
Well, first, let me explain cognitive behavioral therapy. You can kind of think of it as like a triangle. And the connection between the points on the triangle are your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors. And they're linked in this triangle. And so the theory is, and this is very thumbnail sketch here, is if you change the cognitions, then it will change the feelings and the behaviors. Whereas
the thoughts.
Right. Whereas some other techniques might go at the feelings first and then hope that changes the thoughts and the behaviors. So an example of one tool would be challenging your negative thoughts. Now, some of us do this already, but let's say you consistently say to yourself, I'll never feel any better. I'll never feel any better. I'll never feel any better. So I might work with you to figure out, how can you, when that thought comes up in your head, how can you reframe it to a more helpful message to yourself, such as, I'm working on feeling better, or I'm hoping to feel better after a few months, something like that. It actually just shifts. Even just saying it, honestly, I could feel a shift from more hopelessness to hopefulness when I say the more positive reframe. So there's a lot about reframing. Some people like the image of a stop sign. So when they're thinking unhelpful thoughts, we do stop sign, and they imagine a big red stop sign in their heads to just take them off that track, move them to another track that would promote a better mood state.
Okay.
Those are some just kind of brief examples, but there are so many techniques, and cognitive behavioral therapy is actually one of the most researched therapies out there. There is a lot of research that shows that it is actually very successful in working with particularly depression, anxiety, but a lot of other disorders as well.
Okay, so again, this is a question you may or may not be able to answer specifically, but if somebody comes to you and you're talking at the end of the session, does somebody usually spend like a session a week with you? Over how many weeks? I mean, just if somebody just says, I just feeling a little off track, my one emotion is just a little bit overwhelming. How can you help me? Are we looking at, can you give me a sense of what we might be looking at? Or
yeah, so if I can just add to that a little bit, what happens in that first session is that we talk about what that person would like. We define what their goals are.
Okay.
Right? So it's all about focused on, what is it that you want? You want less anger. You want to feel a little more safe and secure in your home. You want whatever it might be. Let's define that so that we know what we're working towards. And then together we develop a treatment plan on getting to that place. So that's the first step.
Okay.
And then my recommendation, if someone's coming to see me, is that initially we meet once a week. Because it's that getting to know you phase. And if it goes longer than that, it's just going to end up taking longer to actually kind of get to know you. So I would recommend once a week. And during that time, we'll continue to check in. Are we on target for what we agreed on with your treatment plan and your goals? Do you feel like it's going in the right direction? And then after that, there's a lot of flexibility about how therapy can play out. I like to think that the client is the captain of the ship. And if they say, I feel like I'm done now, okay, great. Then if you feel like you've gotten to where you want to go, then we can end. Some people say, I've gotten part way to where I want to be, but I want to take a break. I'll call you. And I've had people call me 6 months, a year later and say, I'm ready to come back.
Yeah.
Right? Things change in their life. Maybe the
Yeah.
symptoms flared up and they want to, do a little bit more work. I have some people who I did initial piece of work with, and now I just see them once a month. Just a little reminder, a little booster about, remember those skills? How are they going? Let's check in. Any new things come up? So really it runs the gamut of what suits that person's need.
Okay.
So it strikes me a couple of things. First, so a lot of what you are bringing to the table is that ability, based on a lot of experience, to really talk to somebody, and to kind of get a sense based on who they are of what kinds of things kind of intuitively might work, because there are a number of things you could suggest, but ideally the ones at the top of your list are the ones that are the most likely to kind of work, and the other thing that really strikes, and that's got to be a real gift. That's got to be the fun part of the job. Like Doug Doug really loves his job. I really love my job, right? And once again, the goal of the exercise is, right? If you really love it, it's really not work, right? It's like, I can't believe they pay me to do this is the ideal line, right? But the other thing, in terms of those kinds of temporary things, goes back to kind of the point, the reason why, Doug, you suggested that we have Debbie on was that we've got right now, ironically, we're in this unusual time where people are feeling really in the dumps because it's been so bad for so long, like 8-9 months now, right? And it's like it's never going to end. But on the other hand, we all know in the back of our minds, it's coming to an end. It's not coming to an end tomorrow. We'd like it to, but and so for people to be able to really talk to you and say, look, I'm trying to get through this. It's been really bad. I've gotten myself really in a hole, which Doug and I both know folks who have done that because you're not talking to anybody. Talk about lonely, when people literally can't see you, right? And so I want to get through this, and to be able to help somebody really get through it, and then have some residual skills at the end of the day, to kind of help them after hopefully they're it's back a little bit more normal. But so that's really interesting. That's really interesting.
Yep. It's not, I know a lot of people, and this is part of that stigma that's out there. A lot of people believe it's a lifetime commitment, but that is not the case. Really, it's there for you in whatever way that it would be helpful. Yeah. And some people do come because they want more skills, but sometimes people come also just for the support. Like maybe they have some big decisions that they're mulling over and they're separated from, they don't have people to talk to. And, certain things people don't want to talk to friends and family members about. And so it's nice to have a neutral person to sort of get it out of your mind and just verbalize it. And then together we can kind of look at it from different perspectives and kind of hash it out a little bit and maybe do some brainstorming or investigating and things like that. So it's not always skills. I just wanted to add that too. Sometimes it's just a helpful ear, a supportive, helpful ear.
And I think that's very important for seniors in particular. Families are so dispersed. And frankly, many families are so dysfunctional that they don't want to talk. There are a lot of subjects that folks in their 80s and 90s don't want to share with their kids. Thoughts that they're having, feelings that they're having. And it certainly would be helpful to talk to somebody else who knows that everybody goes through these. It's just a matter of degree, and there are ways that could better help you think about things. Maybe we can find somebody else to help you talk to. If it's not me, or we're talking to a number of people. It's hard because your social circle does begin to disappear and begin to shrink. And one of the keys to longevity is having a strong social circle of friends that you can talk to, because it's just not meant to be done alone.
Absolutely.
And I suppose that I once again, ironically, as a result of this new format, for people who might have been very or more hesitant to like drive to your office and go in and in the waiting room and blah, 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 right? The ability to have this kind of confidential conversation on a screen, you know, can actually be really helpful for folks in terms of helping them be introduced to this without all of the feeling the kind of sense of commitment of actually going to the office and all that. This is really fascinating.
It does make a much more accessible, right, for people who have a hard time getting any place. So it is much more accessible. There's also a level of comfort and safety talking to somebody about personal things from their own environment, in their own home.
Yes.
You know, I have had clients who have done a lot more work doing this type of work than face-to-face, because they're not as anxious as when they had to come into the office. They're just more at ease and willing to open up a little bit more.
Yeah.
So there really are benefits to doing this video therapy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Doug, this was a great idea. As I mentioned to you, Debbie, my job here a lot of times is to provide comic relief and keep track of the time. And I'm looking at the time, and it's the end. It's about the. But Doug, this was a great idea. This, you know, in terms of helping people just get through this, you know, this is really, really, really wonderful. So, Debbie, thank you so much for this. This was just I think this was really helpful to a lot of people. You know.
Yeah, I do too. You know.
Thank you very much.
I really do.
My pleasure.
I wanted to take away sort of the mystery of what a therapist is and what they do, because I think now at time, and she's right. I mean, one reason I did this right away is I felt very comfortable with her as soon as I started talking to her, and we met, last week. And so I said, well, you know, I have to go with my gut feeling on this. So
she just doesn't look that scary, you know. She doesn't really look. You know.
No, I know.
So no. So Debbie, thank you so much for this. Doug, thank you so much for finding this wonderful guest. And folks, I hope you appreciated this. We'll make sure that Debbie's information is on on this show so that you can contact her if you want to contact her. But once again, this is such a low level of kind of commitment. If you're feeling that this could be helpful, you at least ought to give her a call. And look, you get to have her right in your house because you get to actually see her, you know, and you don't have to, right? So think about this. And so thank you very much to you folks. Yeah. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next installment of Frank and Mary here in Southborough. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.